Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are, it looks like, going to be able to process the USMCA here in the Senate this week. That'll be good news for the Senate and for the country, and something I think we have broad bipartisan agreement on. With regard to impeachment, our understanding is, and I think your understanding is as well, is the House is likely to finally send the articles over to us tomorrow. And we'll be able to, we believe, if that happens, in all likelihood, go through some preliminary steps here this week, which could well include the Chief Justice coming over and swearing in members of the Senate and some other kind of housekeeping measures. We hope to be able to achieve that by consent, which would set us up to begin the actual trial next Tuesday. So that's sort of the week ahead and the early part of next week as it looks possible as of right now, and I think that's likely to hold up.
As the leader pointed out, we're at long last going to get the articles of impeachment from the House of Representatives. I think it's safe to say that this is the most rushed, most biased, and most partisan impeachment process in history. And of course, we were told at the outset, as the House was rushing through this, that there was a real sense of urgency. They had to get this done because there was, so important that we get this over to the Senate and get it voted on and attempt to remove the president from office. But clearly, after the Speaker now having sat on it for nearly a month, it's clear that all along this has been a partisan exercise on the part of the Democrats in an attempt to overturn a presidential election. And we're going to do our constitutional duty here. Obviously, we will take what they send us and, as the leader pointed out, process it. But I would certainly hope that in the future that impeachment is reserved for what I think the founders intended, and that is a serious remedy for serious crimes and not something that would be used as a political weapon. But we'll get the process underway and follow the outline that the leader laid out in terms of the organizing resolution, and hopefully get this behind us and back to work for the American people, which is what I think most Americans would like to see and expect us to be doing here in the Senate.
Well, Speaker Pelosi seems to have her pollsters working overtime. She's always looking for poll-tested phrases. They had quid pro quo for a while. Before Christmas, the poll-tested word was urgency, and now she has changed that. On the Sunday show last week, 3 different times she said cover-up. The American people know that if there has been a cover-up, it has been by the Democrats in the House. They have been obsessed with impeaching President Trump from day one. The Speaker has said that they've been at it for 2.5 years. Well, the phone call with the President of Ukraine didn't happen until last July. And in terms of being an unfair process in the House and the cover-up there, they're the ones that held their secret meetings behind closed doors in the basement of the Capitol. They are the ones that prevented due process for the President. They're the ones that have selectively leaked misleading information about the process, and they're the ones that first said the whistleblower would testify and then said the whistleblower would not testify. So to this point, the Harvard-Harris poll last week said only 1 in 3 Americans, only 1 in 3, believe the process in the House was fair and even-handed. Only 1 in 3. The process in the House, it was rushed, it was partisan, and it was sloppy. Justice is going to be done, and it's going to occur in the Senate.
Well, we do want to have a fair process in the Senate. Several people asked yesterday about the motion to dismiss and whether there should be one early. My view then and now was that this process needs to be a process where everybody is heard, and that the person who would benefit the most from everybody being heard is the president. He hasn't had a chance to make his case. He'll have that chance in the Senate. The Senate owes that to him. I think the Congress owes that to the country, that we can't just have a one-sided process that suddenly ends, but a process to where everybody gets a chance to be heard. We've heard a lot from the House. We've particularly heard a lot from the House about how urgent this all was until the last month, when apparently it wasn't urgent at all. But my view is this will be the first chance that the president's had to make his case. He deserves that. The American people deserve a chance to hear the other side of this, which they haven't heard up until now.
This past weekend, I kicked off my 6th annual 99 county tour in Iowa, and my first county stop was in my hometown of Red Oak, where I did an agricultural roundtable. And no surprise there, folks, everybody wanted to know where we were with the USMCA. And so I was proud to report to them that we were taking it up in committees in the Senate, actually doing the work that people expect us to do. And thanks to Dr. Barrasso, this morning we moved out of EPW, the USMCA, which is really great. And I'm glad. Our farmers and ranchers expect us to move on this. And so I am hopeful that we'll be able to take it up on the full Senate floor later this week. But oddly enough, people, when we were having that discussion with those farmers, the only questions that came up about impeachment was, will it delay us passing the USMCA? Okay, so folks back home, they don't care what's going on in this bubble surrounding impeachment. They just simply want to know, are we doing the work that is important to them? Things like transportation, USMCA, are we funding the military appropriately? Those are the things that folks back home really care about, and that's what we should be focusing on. So I am excited that we are moving on USMCA. I will be so thankful to have that out of the Senate and onto the president's desk, and then hopefully be able to move beyond impeachment and really focus on the people's business of impacting their daily lives.
Well, Friday's jobs report provided some more good news for the people of Indiana and all across America. Let me read just some brief numbers here. The unemployment rate held steady at 3.5% in December. 145,000 new jobs were added. Wages continued to grow and are up nearly 3% from a year ago. Folks, this is what the American people want us to work on. This is where this Republican-controlled Senate, working with this president, have been focused intently ever since we were sworn in. The economic policies that we have been championing have been working, whether it's tax reform or deregulation. We need to continue this momentum, and just this week we'll advance the USMCA through the Senate. It's my understanding that the president will be signing on to phase 1 of the trade negotiations with China. And these trade agreements will complement all the other great work that we've done on behalf of the American people.
Yeah, let me just add one thing before going to your questions. I announced last Tuesday that all 53 of us in our conference had agreed on an initial resolution about how to go forward. That remains the case. All 53 of us have reached an understanding very, very similar to the one that was achieved at the beginning of the Clinton impeachment trial, 100-0, that would set up the arguments by the parties, the prosecutors and the defense, and then a written question period, and then after that, the more contentious issue of witnesses would be addressed by the Senate.
Leader McConnell,
Yeah.
on the Russian hack of Burisma, what concern do you have about what role Russia may try to play in the presidential elections this year? And also, Democrats have obviously advocated for moving election security legislation here. Does this change your view on trying to move that because of the concern about what happened with Burisma?
Well, we certainly are concerned about election security. That's why we've appropriated $800 million over the last couple of years to deal with it. I do want to congratulate the current administration on the efforts both in 18 and there were off-year elections in 19, from which we have essentially no reports of any kind of success. So we need to keep our eye on the Russians or anybody else who's trying to mess with our election system and we're appropriating plenty of money to do just that.
Senator, some in your conference have suggested that if Democrats are calling witnesses like John Bolton, they may also want to call witnesses such as Hunter Biden. Would you support calling Hunter Biden?
Well, I think we'll be dealing with the witness issue at the appropriate time into the trial. And I think it's certainly appropriate to point out that both sides would want to call witnesses that they wanted to hear from. So when you get to that issue, I can't imagine that only the witnesses that our Democratic colleagues would want to call would be called.
The president has suggested that you should just move to dismiss. You
Yeah.
clearly want to get this over sooner rather than
Yeah.
later. Why not push to try and dismiss?
Yeah, there is little or no sentiment in the Republican conference for a motion to dismiss. Our members feel that we have an obligation to listen to the arguments, and we've laid out in this resolution an opportunity for everybody to sit there. Remember, senators can't say anything, so they'll have to sit there and listen, to listen carefully to the arguments by both the prosecution and the defense, to follow that up with written questions submitted through the Chief Justice. And that means listening to the case, not dismissing the case. Yeah.
Can there be a fair trial if there are no witnesses?
Well, you know, if you look at the House product, you really got to wonder what the definition of a fair trial is. They did almost nothing that you would expect the House to do in order to set up this case to be considered by the Senate. And with regard to what witnesses are necessary, we're going to vote on that at the appropriate time after we listen to the arguments.
And would the White House be able to block those witnesses?
51 senators will decide who to call. After that, who knows who will employ what kind of legal devices? I have no idea. So, in spite of your very best efforts to fast forward this to that moment, we can't go there yet. So we'll just have to wait and see what the feeling of the Senate is after listening to the arguments and the period of written questions.
Leader McConnell, when are you going to debate and vote on the organizing resolution, and when will you reveal what the resolution will look like?
Well, I think that would come up appropriately next Tuesday, and that's when the vote would occur. That is, assuming we're on the trial next Tuesday, and I think that's the case.
Showing what the document is. Thank you.
I got the Catholic comment.
What?
Is your mark ready? Yeah. Do you have to have recovery software? Really? I essentially the world. I formatted my card twice now. I've used that before for the trial. Really?
it's not going to be
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm proud to be joined by Senator Kaine, Senator Baldwin, Senator Udall, because we were a little late. Had another engagement. Oh, he's here. Good. Oh, he's here. And Senator Udall is here. Good. All right. Well, the past few weeks have highlighted the president's impulsive, erratic, egotistical, and often reckless foreign policy, the consequences of which have made America less safe and unnecessarily put our armed forces in harm's way. From North Korea to Syria to Russia, it's impossible to say the world's a safer place than before President Trump took office. In each of these, and you look, and we're worse off because of his intervention. North Korea has many more nuclear bombs and has ICBMs. Syria is a big mess since he withdrew, and every time he confronts Putin, he loses, and Putin cleans his clock. So it's no wonder that so many Americans are really worried about what he might do in Iran. It's clear that the mothers and fathers of America don't want another endless war in the Middle East, and yet the president could force us into one, or more likely, bumble into one, because strategy and the president don't seem to intersect. That's why I'm glad the Senate will soon consider Senator Kane's war power resolution, which would prevent further escalation of hostilities with Iran. Here is the timetable on that. As you know, we had an awful briefing where it was thought by both Democrats and Republicans that at a very minimum, the leaders of the administration ducked the hard questions and maybe worse, didn't answer them directly and in a way that was clear. And after that meeting, Senator Kane sat down with Senators Paul and Lee, and they came up with a resolution which ripens Sunday, and we believe will get 51 votes that is needed to pass. And so we will work out the timing. We have to figure out how it intersects with impeachment, but we believe that this resolution is the right way to go. It has the support of all 47 Democrats, and I'll let Senator Kane talk more about it soon. But this vote is crucial. It's what the Founding Fathers wanted. The power to make war should be with the Congress, not with the executive branch. And it's past time for Congress to put a check on any president, let alone an impulsive, erratic president who often seems to do foreign policy to satisfy the momentary needs of his ego rather than to have a long-term strategy. Now, also this week, the Senate will begin the third impeachment trial of a sitting president in our nation's history. Let's remember what this trial is for. For a president, any president, to threaten a foreign country with the cutoff of aid unless they interfere in our elections is what the Founding Fathers felt was one of the worst abuses a president could have. When I was in high school and learned about the Founding Fathers writing about foreign power interference in an election, I sort of shrugged my shoulders. I said, what the heck is that? Now we know. Now we know. Americans strongly believe that it's Americans who ought to determine who we elect, not some foreign power. Not some foreign power. So these charges are deep and serious, and all we can say is we join the American people in wanting the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, to come out of the trial. If you want the truth, you have to have witnesses. You have to have documents. Who has ever heard of a trial without witnesses and documents? I'm pleased that some of my Republican colleagues are now beginning to come around to our position. When I first wrote to Leader McConnell 3 weeks ago and asked him for witnesses and documents, he didn't pay much attention. His goal, in my judgment at that point, was simply to bring up a resolution and dismiss all the proceedings. But he couldn't do it because not only of what Nancy Pelosi did, but the weight of American opinion, that a dismissal without any documents or witnesses would not sit well with them. So, we're soon going to have an opportunity to see where my Republican colleagues really stand on the question of witnesses testifying and documents being added. The President and the American people deserve nothing less than a fair, full, and honest process. Senator Udall.
Thank you very much, Senator Schumer. And let me just touch on both of these subjects. First of all, it's been a real pleasure working with Senator Kane and Senator Baldwin and many other Democratic senators on this issue of an unauthorized war with Iran. As many of you know, I introduced a bill to that, a bipartisan bill to that specific issue in 2018. I've introduced it again in 2019. It was co-sponsored by Senator Paul. We were able to amend the NDAA, or at least have a vote on it, on that specific amendment, which got the support of 51 senators at the time. That 4 Republican senators joined us, and we have built a momentum after that. What Senator Kaine is now doing with this War Powers resolution, I think continues to build. And I think he will talk about the support it has, but my sense of listening to Republican senators and talking to Republican senators are there are many after this recent incident that feel very antsy about the way the president is behaving in terms of war and his war powers and the kinds of statements he's made. So I think we're gaining support on this one. Let me just say on the issue of impeachment, for me as a former trial lawyer, former attorney general, prosecutor, to me a trial is about seeking the truth, trying to find the truth. And I don't know how in a situation like we have now, very unlike President Clinton when everybody had been deposed, the president had been deposed, we had depositions in a private setting, you had people appearing before a grand jury. We do not have that situation today. So I don't see how you find the truth in the areas where we don't know answers without calling witnesses like John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, and several of the other witnesses that were working under them there in the White House, and getting all the relevant documents. So I think also we're gaining momentum there. I think the American people want a fair, open trial, and I hope that we will move in that direction as we begin this later this week and then go into the trial actually on Tuesday. Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. And I want to especially thank both Senators Kaine and Udall for their leadership in working to force a debate and a vote in Congress to prevent further escalations of hostilities in Iran. There are hard lessons that we should be learning when America chooses to go to war in the Middle East or elsewhere without a full public debate in the Congress of the United States. There is nothing more American than debate. And when it comes to something as serious as sending our troops to war, there must be a debate. We must have this debate. For years, many of us have been deeply concerned about the prospect of President Trump just stumbling into a war with Iran and making us less safe. After decades of U.S. military engagement in the Middle East, Congress must not allow this administration to repeat the mistakes of the past and go to war without the support of Congress and the American people. You know, the Constitution is so crystal clear on this matter. Only Congress has the authority to declare war. Senator Kaine's bipartisan War Powers resolution, which has already cleared the House of Representatives with bipartisan support, is simple. If the President wants to send more young men and women to war, we must first have a public debate in Congress and have a conversation with those we represent, the American people. President Trump's foreign policy, especially with regard to Iran, is a chaotic disaster that has not made us safer. And that's why I believe it is so important that we have this debate in Congress. We owe it to the service members, we owe it to the American people who are sick and tired of war in the Middle East, and we have a constitutional responsibility to prevent the President from going to war with Iran and sending more American troops into harm's way without congressional authorization. It's time for Congress to live up to this responsibility.
Senator Kaine.
Well, as my colleague said, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk briefly today, the framers gave to Congress the power, sole power, to declare war because they knew that it would be a safeguard against a rush. We don't want to rush. This should be the hardest decision we make. And because we're going to be ordering young men and women to risk their lives, we shouldn't do it unless we have the guts to have the debate and have the vote and say that a war is in the national interest. I introduced this bill originally on the 3rd of January. It's under a privileged proceeding that's only been used twice in the 45-year history of the War Powers Act. And what the privilege gives you is the ability to have a floor vote in a reasonable period of time on a simple majority, not filibusterable, not with the 60-vote threshold. In conversations, as Senator Schumer said, with Republican colleagues, especially after the briefing last week, they were discouraged that the attitude that was being communicated to us was that Congress is an annoyance. Why do you want to know? We don't have to tell you anything. You should be glad that we're here 6 days later to give you a few morsels of information. And so after that, they came to me, and we have been able to make some amendments that have earned the support first of Senators Lee and Paul, but now the support also of Senators Young and Collins, and there are a number of other Republicans who are looking at it as well. So we now have the 51 votes that we need for the version that's the bipartisan version. That doesn't mature till this weekend. It would first be available for consideration by the Senate next week. Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell are sort of talking through the timing of it. But the good news is this: we now have a majority of colleagues, Democratic and Republican, who will stand strong for the principle that we shouldn't be at war without a vote of Congress. And that's a very positive thing. And I'm going to keep working to get more beyond the 51 that have declared. I'm going to keep working to get more until we have this vote soon. Thanks.
Great. Questions?
Leader Schumer, how confident are you in Senator Collins sort of seeing her goal of working with other moderate Republicans to have witnesses in the trial come forward? She's, I think some Democrats would argue, given Democrats false hope in the past. So how confident are you this time?
Look, the bottom line is that the American people are strongly for witnesses and documents. 64% of Republicans are. And that's what I think is importuning many Republicans to come forward. And I'm not going to comment on any one individual, but I think there's a whole bunch who are really seriously entertaining this.
Mitch McConnell, according to our reports, has spoken with his Republican conference about the document, the resolution that will kick off this trial. Have you seen the resolution yet, and are you on board with his proposed timeline?
No, I haven't seen the resolution, so can't be on board with anything yet.
Thank you, Leader. I know you have concerns about the Phase 1 trade deal the President's expected to sign tomorrow. Is it in your view in any way that you think the President is caving to Beijing?
Yes.
And why do you think he's perhaps settling to do Phase 1
I
now
think the Chinese are behind his back sort of laughing that they did so well. The issue, there are fundamental ways China takes advantage of America. Very few of those have been changed. And it seems instead the President has said, well, if you buy some soybeans, I'll back off. And the Chinese, there's no even real certainty or commitment that they will buy those soybeans. And furthermore, many of the Chinese companies and groups that have purchased soybeans have signed long-term contracts with Argentinian and Brazilian producers, so they don't need any more soybeans. And so the bottom line is that this first agreement, is a huge victory for the Chinese, and for all the tough talk that the President gave us on China, we've gotten very little in return when it comes to intellectual property, when it comes to people demanding joint agreements, when it comes to cyber theft, when it comes to government-subsidized businesses, the nub of our complaint. And it gives me very little confidence that if there is a round 2 before November of 2020, if after November 2020, I hope, pray, and believe that Trump won't be there, that it will be any better.
What specific qualities are you looking for in a House impeachment or skill set?
Well, I think, I have great faith in Speaker Pelosi. She has tremendous talent in her caucus, and she'll pick a good team.
As far as
North Korea, recently Kim Jong-un said that they not permit anymore the negotiations table with the United States.
Well, look, I think.
But why President sent a letter to the Kim Jong-un all the time? He said that he has a good relationship with North Korea, but it's different.
Well, I think that the president, if the president's behavior in North Korea has been a metaphor for his foreign policy in general. he's gotten taken to the cleaners. We're much worse off. He criticized President Obama, and we are much worse off today. And the president seems to have abandoned any real gains for a couple of photo ops, which were ephemeral and don't even benefit him. Taylor?
Do you have a sense, if your optimism about witnesses is correct, do you have a sense of whether or not McConnell will come to you and reopen negotiations?
Look, first, I can't predict whether we'll have witnesses or not. At first, everyone said no. McConnell seemed to rule the roost. Now we're having some people entertain it, but you don't know what's going to happen. So we're in better shape than we were a few weeks ago, but there's no certainties here at all. Whether he wants to, I asked him 4 times to sit down so we could negotiate witnesses and documents. He said no each time. I'm always open to talking to him. Thank you, everybody.